Hello there and welcome to Deep Sleep Seas. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe the day was long, maybe your mind is restless, or maybe you simply prefer falling asleep to the mysteries of the ocean rather than counting imaginary sheep. Whatever brought you here, you've arrived at the right place. Tonight we're diving into something truly extraordinary, something that challenges our very understanding of what it means to be an individual, what it means to be alive as a singular entity versus a collective whole. Let your body sink into comfort. Let your breathing slow and deepen. There's nothing you need to do but listen and drift, because tonight we're exploring one of the ocean's most beautiful paradoxes, a creature that is both one and many, a colony that lives as an individual, a collection of specialized bodies that cannot exist apart yet together form something greater than their sum. We're talking about the Portuguese Man O War, known scientifically as Physalia physalis, a floating marvel that drifts across tropical and subtropical seas, trailing venomous threads that can stretch over 100 feet into the blue depths below. If you enjoy these ocean stories as you drift towards sleep, consider subscribing so you don't miss future journeys into the deep, and if you're still awake enough, let me know where in the world you're listening from. I read every single comment. Now, let's begin this gentle exploration of a creature that has puzzled scientists, fascinated sailors, and inspired wonder for centuries. Let the rhythm of the ocean waves carry you as we float alongside this remarkable colonial organism. Most creatures you encounter in your daily life are straightforward individuals. A dog is a dog. A fish is a fish. You are you. A single organism made of trillions of cells working together, all sharing the same genetic code, all descended from that very first fertilized egg that became you. But what if I told you there's something floating in the ocean right now that blurs the line between individual and colony, between one and many, in a way that makes philosophers and biologists pause and reconsider what we mean when we say organism? The Portuguese Man O War appears, at first glance, to be a single creature. It has a distinctive balloon-like float, usually tinted in shades of translucent blue, purple and pink, rising several inches above the water's surface. Below this float, long tentacles trail downward, sometimes extending 30 feet, sometimes stretching to an astonishing 100 feet or more into the depths, drifting like living threads in the current. To anyone who encounters it floating on the surface of tropical waters, it looks like one animal, one entity, one thing. But look closer. Examine it under a microscope, study its development, follow its life story from the beginning, and you'll discover that what appears to be a single creature is actually a colony of dozens, perhaps hundreds of individual organisms called zooids. Each zooid is technically a separate animal. Each has its own specialized role. Each is genetically identical to all the others because they all developed from the same single fertilized egg. They budded off from one another as the colony grew, like branches extending from a tree, each branch technically separate but forever connected to the whole. These zooids remain physiologically connected throughout their entire existence. They share a common circulatory system. They share the same body cavity. Nutrients absorbed by one zooid flow through the colony to feed others. Waste products are shared. Information, in whatever form these creatures process information, seems to flow between them. They cannot survive independently. If you separate them, they die. They are individuals that must live as a collective. Organisms that function as organs within a larger body. So what is a Portuguese Man O War? Is it one animal or many? Scientists have debated this question for generations. From an ecological perspective, from a functional perspective, it behaves as a single organism. It hunts as one. It moves as one entity, subject to wind and current. It reproduces as a male colony or a female colony, never both. But from an embryological perspective, from a developmental standpoint, it is clearly many individuals, many separate zooids that happen to remain connected as they grew. This is not merely an academic question. It touches on something fundamental about life itself. Where do we draw the line between individual and colony? Your own body contains trillions of bacteria, particularly in your gut, that are not you, not your cells. Yet without them you could not digest food properly. Are they part of you or separate? You are made of cells, each with its own membrane, its own machinery, yet we call you one person. The Portuguese Man O War pushes this question further, existing in a liminal space between the clearly individual and the clearly colonial. And perhaps, as you drift towards sleep, There's something beautiful in not having a simple answer. Perhaps the ocean is telling us that life is more fluid, more interconnected, more wonderfully complex than our simple categories suggest. The Portuguese Man O War floats on, unconcerned with our philosophical debates, simply being what it is. A colony of threads, a collection of specialists, a floating community that hunts and feeds and reproduces and drifts across thousands of miles of open ocean, neither purely one nor purely many, but something in between. To truly understand the Portuguese Man O War, we need to meet its component parts, the specialized zooids that work together to create this floating marvel. There are 7 different types of zooids that scientists have identified within a single colony, but they fall into 4 main functional categories, 4 essential roles that must all be performed for the colony to survive. Think of them as organs in a body, except these organs are technically separate organisms that evolved to become interdependent. Let's start at the top, with the most visible part, the structure that gives this creature its common name. The pneumatophore is a gas-filled bladder that floats on the water's surface like a small, translucent balloon. It's what sailors noticed from their ships, what reminded them of Portuguese warships under full sail, their caravels catching the wind as they explored the oceans in the Age of Discovery. This pneumatophore can grow up to 6 inches tall and roughly a foot long, though sizes vary considerably from colony to colony. The pneumatophore is filled with gas, primarily carbon monoxide mixed with air. Yes, carbon monoxide, the same gas that's poisonous to humans. The colony produces this gas and gradually replaces it with air from the atmosphere through diffusion. This mixture gives the pneumatophore exactly the right buoyancy to keep the entire colony floating at the water's surface, neither sinking into the depths nor rising too high where it might dry out in the sun and wind. But the pneumatophore is more than just a float. It's a sail. The top of this structure has a distinctive crest or ridge running along its length. When the wind blows, this crest catches the breeze and propels the entire colony forward, dragging its tentacles through the water below. The colony has no muscles for swimming, no fins, no way to propel itself through directed movement. It is entirely at the mercy of wind and current, a fact that shapes everything about its life and distribution. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Not all pneumatophores are oriented the same way. Some lean to the left, others to the right. A colony with a leftward-leaning pneumatophore, when pushed by wind, naturally drifts at about a 45-degree angle to the right of the wind's direction. A right-leaning colony does the opposite, drifting leftward relative to the wind. This handedness is determined early in the colony's development, while it's still growing beneath the surface, and it remains fixed throughout the colony's life. Why does this matter? Because it helps spread Portuguese Man O War populations across the ocean. When wind blows consistently from one direction, left-handed and right-handed colonies will drift along slightly different paths, dispersing rather than all accumulating in the same location. It's a brilliant evolutionary solution to the problem of having no control over your own movement. You can't steer, so evolution built 2 different steering mechanisms into the population, ensuring that not all colonies end up in the same place, that some will find favorable conditions even when others strand on hostile shores. The pneumatophore has another trick. It can deflate when threatened by predators from above, particularly seabirds, or when at risk of drying out under intense sun. The colony can release some of the gas from its float and temporarily submerge, sinking below the surface where danger is less immediate. After the threat passes, it can reinflate and return to the surface. This ability to briefly descend gives the colony at least some small measure of control in an existence otherwise dominated by forces beyond its influence. Now let's descend below the waterline to meet the hunters, the dactylozoids. These are the tentacle-bearing zooids, the specialized polyps that bear the Portuguese Man O War's most famous and feared feature, its stinging tentacles. A typical colony has multiple tentacles, anywhere from a handful to dozens, each one trailing downward from the main body, like a fishing line cast into the blue. These tentacles are not uniform structures. They're made up of repeating segments, each segment bearing thousands upon thousands of microscopic stinging cells called nematocysts. We'll explore these deadly capsules in detail shortly, but for now, know that each tentacle is essentially a living weapon, a capture device that hangs in the water, waiting for something edible to brush against it. The length of these tentacles is staggering. A typical Portuguese man o' war has tentacles averaging around 30 feet long, extending downward and backward as the colony drifts forward, but they can grow much longer. Some individuals have been measured with tentacles exceeding 100 feet in length, longer than a blue whale, trailing through the water like gossamer threads of death. Imagine swimming in tropical waters and not seeing the small purple float on the surface 50 feet away, not knowing that invisible threads are hanging all around you, each one armed with millions of stinging cells. These tentacles aren't rigid. They drift and curl with the current, spreading out in the water like a vast invisible net. Small fish, shrimp, larval creatures, even occasionally larger fish, swim into this net and trigger the nematocysts. Within milliseconds, they're paralyzed. Within seconds, they're being drawn upward toward the digestive zooids. Which brings us to the gastrozooids, the feeding polyps. These zooids are located along the underside of the float, clustered near the base of the pneumatophore. Each gastrozooid has its own mouth, its own digestive cavity. When a tentacle captures prey, muscular contractions in the tentacle slowly draw the paralyzed victim upward. The gastrozooids respond immediately. They writhe and extend, opening their mouths as the food approaches. Once prey reaches a gastrozooid, that zooid spreads itself over the captured animal and begins secreting digestive enzymes. These enzymes break down proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, liquefying the tissues of the prey so they can be absorbed. It's external digestion, the same strategy used by many of the Portuguese man o' war's distant relatives in the phylum Cnidaria. The process takes hours, sometimes longer depending on the size of the prey. Each colony has multiple gastrozooids, perhaps dozens, each capable of processing food independently. The nutrients absorbed by one gastrozooid don't stay localized. They flow through the colony's shared circulatory system, distributed to all the other zooids. A dactylozooid that captures food can't digest it. A pneumatophore that catches wind can't hunt, but together with nutrients and gases flowing between them through interconnected tissues, they all survive. They are specialists, each entirely dependent on the other's specializations. Finally, we come to the gonozooids, the reproductive polyps. These are perhaps the least understood of the major zooid types, hidden deep within the colony's structure. The gonozooids are arranged on branching structures called gonodendra, tree-like assemblies that grow beneath the float. Each gonodendron contains not only the reproductive gonophores themselves, which house either ovaries or testes, but also additional support zooids, including small gastrozooids, palpans, and even modified medusa-like structures called nectaphores. The presence of nectaphores on the gonodendra has led scientists to speculate that these entire reproductive branches might detach from the colony when mature and swim off independently into the depths, perhaps using the nectaphores for propulsion. This would allow the colony to disperse its reproductive cells across a wider area, increasing the chances of fertilization. But this is speculation. No one has ever observed mature gonodendra with fully developed eggs or sperm. No one has witnessed them detaching. No one knows for certain where fertilization occurs, at what depth, under what conditions. Each Portuguese man o' war colony is either male or female, never both. All the gonozooids in a colony produce either eggs or sperm, determined by whatever genetic mechanisms control sex in these creatures. When reproduction occurs, likely in the autumn based on when juveniles are most commonly found, the gonophores release their gametes into the water. Sperm and eggs drift freely, mixing, and somewhere in the open ocean, fertilization happens. From that fertilized egg, a larva develops. It begins budding off new zooids, building a colony one specialized individual at a time. First comes a tiny pneumatophore, and a single early feeding zooid. Then more gastrozooids bud off. Then the tentacle-bearing dactylozooids appear. Slowly the colony grows larger, more complex, adding new zooids through a sexual budding, even as it remains a single organism genetically, all its parts descended from that one fertilized egg. Eventually, the pneumatophore grows large enough to provide enough buoyancy to float, and the juvenile colony rises to the surface for the first time, catching its first breath of wind, beginning its life as a drifter on the ocean's skin. It will continue growing, adding new zooids for weeks or months until it reaches maturity. And throughout its life, which may last a year or more, all these zooids remain connected, specialized, interdependent. a living architecture that captures our imagination precisely because it defies our usual categories of life. If the Portuguese Man O War has a reputation, it's for its sting. Swimmers, surfers, and beachgoers in tropical waters know to watch for that distinctive purple float bobbing on the waves. Lifeguards raise purple flags when these colonies appear in numbers. News stories warn of beach closures, and rightfully so, because the Portuguese Man O War possesses one of the most sophisticated and painful venom delivery systems in the entire ocean. That system centers on the nematocyst, a microscopic capsule found in staggering numbers along every inch of the colony's tentacles. A single tentacle, 30 feet long, may bear millions of these tiny weapons, and they remain potent long after the colony dies, long after tentacles detach and wash onto shore. Dried, dead, Portuguese Man O War tentacles lying on the beach can still deliver painful stings if you step on them or pick them up, sometimes days or even weeks after the colony died. So what exactly is a nematocyst? It's a specialized cell, found exclusively in the phylum Cnidaria, which includes not just siphonophores like our subject, but also jellyfish, corals, sea anemones, and hydroids. Each nematocyst is like a microscopic harpoon loaded into a pressure chamber, coiled and waiting. The structure is remarkably complex for something so small. Inside each nematocyst cell is an organelle, a specialized structure within the cell, containing a hollow, coiled thread. This thread is turned inside out, like a finger of a glove pushed inward. At its tip are barbs, sharp and backward pointing. The thread and its barbs are bathed in venom, a complex cocktail of proteins and toxins we'll examine in a moment. The entire apparatus is under tremendous internal pressure, maintained by osmotic forces that keep the cell swollen with fluid. On the outside of the nematocyst is a trigger structure called a sonidocyte, essentially a tiny hair-like projection. When something touches this trigger with the right combination of mechanical pressure and chemical signature, the nematocyst fires. The entire discharge happens in less than 3 milliseconds, one of the fastest cellular processes in biology. The coiled thread suddenly everts, turning right side out, and shoots forward like a spring-loaded harpoon. The speed is incredible, the acceleration tremendous. The thread can reach accelerations of over 5 million times the force of gravity when it hits its target, whether that's the skin of a fish, the shell of a shrimp, or your own flesh if you're unlucky enough to touch a tentacle. Those barbs penetrate the surface. The hollow thread follows, driving deep into the tissue like a hypodermic needle, and venom flows through the hollow cord directly into the wound. Portuguese Man O War nematocysts come in two sizes. The smaller ones measure about 11 nanometers in length. The larger ones about 24 nanometers. That's 24 billionths of a meter, smaller than most bacteria. Yet even at this microscopic scale, the engineering is precise, the execution flawless. Touch a tentacle, and thousands of these microscopic harpoons fire into your skin in an instant, each one injecting its payload of venom. The venom itself is a masterpiece of biochemical warfare. The main component is a protein called physalytoxin, named after the scientific genus Physalia. Physalytoxin is a potent hemolysin, meaning it ruptures blood cells. It comprises about 28% of the total venom protein and was the first hemolytic toxin ever isolated directly from the nematocysts of any cnidarian. The molecule is large, with a molecular weight around 240,000 atomic mass units, and it appears to be composed of 3 unequal subunits, all of which are glycosylated, meaning they have sugar molecules attached to them. How does physalytoxin work? It's a pore-forming toxin. When it contacts a cell membrane, it binds to the surface and then changes shape, inserting itself into the membrane like a key sliding into a lock. Multiple physalytoxin molecules cluster together and form a pore, a hole right through the cell membrane. This pore is roughly 1.2 nanometers in diameter, large enough for ions and small molecules to flood through. Once that pore opens, the cell's carefully maintained internal environment collapses. Calcium ions flood in from outside where they're concentrated. Potassium ions flood out. The cell swells with water, trying to equalize the osmotic pressure. Blood cells literally burst. Other cells die more slowly, but the result is the same: tissue damage, cell death, inflammation. But physalytoxin isn't the only toxin in the venom. There are neurotoxins that affect the nervous system. blocking certain types of neurons and interfering with neuromuscular junctions, the connections between nerves and muscles. These neurotoxins alter the electrical signals that nerves use to communicate, changing end plate potentials and end plate currents in complex ways that scientists are still working to fully understand. There are proteins that interfere with insulin secretion, potentially affecting blood sugar regulation. There are enzymes, a whole cocktail of them, similar to what you might find in a snake bite: phospholipases, proteases, enzymes that break down various components of tissue. The venom is not a simple poison but a complex mixture designed to accomplish multiple goals: immobilize prey quickly, begin breaking down tissue for easier digestion, and defend the colony from predators. The effect on humans varies with the size of the exposure. A brief brush against a single tentacle delivers pain, immediate and intense. Victims describe it as burning, stabbing, a hot wire pressed against the skin. Red welts appear where the tentacles made contact, whip-like marks that trace the path of contact. The pain peaks within minutes and can last for hours, though it usually begins to subside after the first hour or two. The welts may remain for days. A more substantial exposure, where someone becomes entangled in multiple tentacles or wraps a tentacle around an arm or leg, delivers vastly more venom. In these cases, the pain is excruciating. Systemic effects can occur: swelling, difficulty breathing, cardiac effects. The venom can cause abnormal heart rhythms, affect blood pressure, induce shock. There are documented cases of people dying from Portuguese Man O War envenomation, though fatalities are rare. Most deaths involve either massive exposures, allergic reactions that escalate into anaphylactic shock, or secondary complications like drowning when someone is stung while swimming. Interestingly, the Portuguese Man O War played a role in one of the major medical discoveries of the 20th century. In 1902, a French physiologist named Charles Richet was sailing on a yacht in the Mediterranean with Prince Albert I of Monaco. They collected Portuguese Man O War specimens and extracted their venom. Richet and his colleague Paul Porchet injected this venom into dogs to study its toxic effects. They gave the dogs a first dose, waited for them to recover, then gave a second dose. What happened next shocked them. The second dose, even though it was smaller than the first, caused much more severe reactions. Dogs that had survived the first injection died from the second one. Richet and Porchet had discovered anaphylaxis, the phenomenon where a second exposure to a substance causes a more severe reaction than the first. It's the mechanism behind many severe allergies. The immune system, primed by the first exposure, overreacts to the second, potentially with fatal consequences. Richet received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1913 for this discovery, all because of experiments with Portuguese Man O War venom. The creature that causes such pain to swimmers has inadvertently contributed to medical science, helping us understand a fundamental mechanism of the immune system. For those stung, treatment has evolved. For years, folk wisdom suggested remedies ranging from the application of meat tenderizer to urination on the sting site. Most of these don't work. What does work is heat, immersing the affected area in water, as hot as you can safely tolerate, around 110 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit, for 20 to 45 minutes, provides the most effective pain relief. The heat breaks down some of the toxin proteins, and seems to interfere with the pain signaling itself. First, though, you need to remove any tentacles still clinging to the skin, but never with bare hands. Use gloves, a stick, anything to avoid further stings. Rinse the area with seawater, not fresh water. Fresh water can cause additional nematocysts to fire due to osmotic changes. Seawater is isotonic with the tissue and won't trigger firing. There's debate about whether vinegar helps or harms. For box jellyfish, vinegar is absolutely the right treatment, inactivating unfired nematocysts. For Portuguese Man O War, studies have shown conflicting results. Some suggest vinegar may cause more nematocysts to fire, others show no effect. The current recommendation leans toward avoiding vinegar and using seawater instead. What's fascinating is that these nematocysts, these microscopic weapons, remain functional even after death. A Portuguese Man O War colony washes ashore. The sun beats down, the tissues dry out and shrivel. Days pass. The float deflates. The tentacles lie tangled on the sand. You might think it's dead, that it's safe to handle. But those nematocysts are still loaded, still under pressure, still capable of firing. Touch that dried tentacle, and you'll learn painfully that death doesn't disarm this creature. The cells may be dead, but the mechanism within them remains cocked and ready. This persistence is actually evolutionarily clever. Imagine you're a predator who has never encountered a Portuguese man o' war. You find one washed up on shore, apparently dead. You poke it, perhaps try to eat it. Instantly, you receive a painful sting. Even though this particular colony is dead and gains no benefit from defending itself, other colonies in the population benefit because you've just learned to avoid things that look like Portuguese man o' war. The lesson remains in the population even when individual colonies die. And in the water, when the colony is alive and hunting, these millions of nematocysts create a deadly gauntlet. A fish swims through, it brushes a tentacle. Thousands of nematocysts fire in an instant. The fish convulses, paralyzed. Within seconds, it goes limp. The tentacle, through muscular contractions, begins drawing the fish upward toward the waiting gastrozooids. The colony has fed. The venomous threads have done their work. And somewhere below, other fish continue swimming, unaware that just above them, invisible lines of death drift in the current, waiting for the next touch, the next meal, the next delivery of microscopic harpoons, loaded with some of the ocean's most sophisticated venom. The Portuguese man o' war is a citizen of the open ocean, a wanderer of tropical and subtropical seas, found across vast expanses of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. But calling it a citizen implies choice, implies some control over destination. The Portuguese man o' war has no such control. It is among the most passive of all ocean creatures, completely at the mercy of forces far larger than itself, unable to swim, unable to change direction through any action of its own. Yet through this very passivity, it has colonized a remarkable portion of the world's oceans. Let's start with that word Nustan, a term that might be new to you. The Nustan is the community of organisms that live at the interface between water and air, at that thin boundary layer where the ocean meets the atmosphere. It's a strange habitat, subject to unique environmental challenges. The creatures living here experience intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun, unfiltered by the meters or miles of water that protect deeper-dwelling organisms. They face the risk of desiccation, of drying out when wind and sun evaporate water faster than they can retain it. They endure wave action, the constant churning of the surface, the violence of storms. But the Nustan also offers advantages. Light is abundant here for any organism that can photosynthesize or that preys on organisms that photosynthesize. Gas exchange with the atmosphere is effortless, and perhaps most importantly, this interface is vast. The ocean surface covers about 71% of Earth's surface, nearly 3 times the area of all terrestrial habitats combined. It's an enormous living space for any organism that can survive its challenges. The Portuguese man o' war has specialized to exploit this niche. Its pneumatophore keeps it floating at the surface, its gas-filled bladder providing exactly the right buoyancy. The translucent blues and purples of the float serve as camouflage, matching the color of ocean waves when viewed from above. To a seabird flying overhead, scanning for prey, that small purple blob on the water blends with the whitecaps and the blue of the waves, making it harder to spot and attack. But the float does more than keep the colony at the surface. It's a sail, a structure specifically shaped to catch the wind. That ridge along the top, that crest, acts like the sail of a ship. When wind blows across the ocean surface, it catches that crest and pushes the entire colony downwind, dragging the tentacles through the water below, like fishing lines behind a drifting boat. The colony has no muscles for swimming. Siphonophores like the Portuguese man o' war evolved from ancestors that could swim. Ancestors that had nectophores, bell-shaped structures that could pulse like jellyfish bells to provide propulsion. Some modern siphonophores retain these swimming bells, but the Portuguese man o' war has abandoned swimming entirely in favor of sailing. Its nectophores, what remains of them, are found only on the gonadendra, possibly used to help those reproductive structures swim after they detach, if indeed they do detach. The main colony is committed to wind power. This commitment means the colony's distribution is determined largely by wind patterns and ocean currents. Portuguese man o' war are found throughout the tropical and subtropical zones, roughly between the latitudes where water temperature remains warm enough for them to thrive. They're common in the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, the Caribbean Sea, the Sargasso Sea in the North Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific from Hawaii to Australia. Anywhere the water stays above about 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, they can survive. But their range extends beyond the tropics during certain times of year or under unusual conditions. Occasionally, they appear in British and Irish waters, in the Bay of Fundy in Canada, along the coast of New England. These northward incursions usually happen when strong southerly winds combine with warm ocean currents to push colonies far beyond their normal range. Most die when they encounter cooler waters or when northerly winds push them ashore, but their presence in these temperate regions shows how far wind can carry them. The handedness of the pneumatophore, that left-leaning or right-leaning orientation we discussed earlier, plays a crucial role in dispersal. Imagine a consistent wind blowing from the northeast, a trade wind common in tropical regions. A population of Portuguese Man O War drifts in this wind. The left-handed colonies, their pneumatophores leaning left, catch the wind and drift off at a 45-degree angle to the southeast relative to the wind direction. The right-handed colonies drift southwest. Over days and weeks, the two groups separate. They explore different parts of the ocean. If the wind pushes all of them toward shore, half will arrive on beaches while the other half is pushed out to sea. This increases the survival of the population as a whole, spreading the risk, ensuring that not all colonies experience the same fate. It's an elegant solution to the problem of being unable to steer. Scientists have used mathematical models to track Portuguese Man O War movements and to predict where they'll appear. These models treat the colonies as particles drifting in combined wind and current fields. The models can run backward in time, taking the location of a mass stranding event and calculating where those colonies must have come from. One study of a major stranding event in the Bay of Biscay, off the coast of Spain and France, ran the model backward and determined that the colonies originated in the North Atlantic subtropical gyre, thousands of miles away, before being caught in winds that pushed them northeast. Other studies have tried to predict forward, to anticipate when and where Portuguese Man O War will appear in numbers. This is important for tourism and public safety. Beaches want warning before blooms arrive. The models aren't perfect because they depend on accurate wind and current data, and because Portuguese Man O War behavior isn't entirely predictable, but they're getting better, and they reveal just how far these colonies can travel. Individual colonies have been tracked drifting for thousands of miles over periods of months. Their maximum speed depends on wind.
In moderate winds of around 15 miles per hour, a colony might drift at around 2 to 3 miles per hour, roughly the speed of a human walking. Faster winds mean faster drift. Over a year, a colony could theoretically drift from the Caribbean to the British Isles, carried by the Gulf Stream and prevailing winds, though most die long before completing such a journey.
They travel not alone but often in groups. Sometimes hundreds or even thousands of Portuguese Man O War colonies drift together in the same general area, all caught in the same wind patterns, all following the same currents. These aggregations can be spectacular. The ocean surface dotted with purple floats as far as the eye can see. They're also dangerous. Swimmers entering water containing this many colonies face almost certain stings from the countless tentacles hanging below. Why do they aggregate? Partly it's just physics. Wind and currents tend to concentrate floating objects along convergence zones, lines in the ocean where different water masses meet, where floating material accumulates. The same forces that create those long lines of seaweed or trash in the open ocean create concentrations of Portuguese Man O War. But there may also be biological factors. If reproduction requires a critical density of colonies for successful fertilization, evolution might favor behaviors or developmental patterns that help colonies aggregate during reproductive periods. As they drift, they hunt. Those long tentacles trail through the water, sampling every layer from the surface down to depths of 30 feet or more for typical colonies, 100 feet for those with exceptionally long tentacles. They encounter schools of fish, swarms of plankton, drifting larvae. They sting and capture whatever they touch. They have no eyes to see prey, no ears to hear it. But they don't need those senses. Their strategy is to simply exist in the water, tentacles spread, and let prey come to them. It's a passive hunting strategy, perfectly matched to their passive locomotion. They can't chase prey, but they don't need to. The ocean brings prey to them. They can't flee predators, but they have venom for defense and the ability to temporarily submerge. Everything about them is adapted to a life of drifting, of going where the wind and currents take them, of making the best of whatever conditions they encounter. And in this passive drifting, they explore the surface of the ocean more thoroughly than many creatures that can swim. A fish that swims may cover great distances, but it chooses its path based on where it thinks food or mates might be, based on environmental cues. It explores strategically. The Portuguese Man O War explores randomly, at the mercy of chaos, wind, current, weather. Over time, this random exploration samples the ocean more completely than strategic exploration might, finding resources and niches that no swimming creature would think to look for. So they drift, these colonies of living threads, sailing on their gas-filled balloons across thousands of miles of open water. They have no destination, no home, no territory. Every place is temporary. Every condition is something to endure or exploit as long as it lasts. They are the ultimate nomads of the ocean's surface, bound to the wind, carried by the currents, living their entire lives in motion, never still, always traveling, going wherever the ocean takes them, hunting as they go, reproducing when conditions allow, surviving through their very inability to resist, through their perfect adaptation to a life of surrender to forces far greater than themselves. Imagine you're a small fish, perhaps a larval creature just a few centimeters long, swimming through warm tropical waters. The sun filters down through the surface in shimmering columns of light. You're hunting for tiny zooplankton, barely visible specks drifting in the water. Your world is blue, endless, three-dimensional. You swim upward toward the surface where light is brightest, where your prey might be most concentrated. You don't see the threat above you. How could you? The Portuguese Man O War's tentacles are nearly transparent, hanging in the water like invisible tripwires. The colony drifts at the surface. Its purple float small and easily overlooked, but those tentacles extend down 30 feet, maybe more, spreading out in the current, swaying gently, waiting. You swim closer. Still, you don't see them. Even if you did, even if you had the cognitive capacity to recognize danger, it would be too late. You brush against a tentacle. The contact is light, barely noticeable, but it's enough. Thousands of nematocysts fire simultaneously. The sensation must be overwhelming, if a fish can even process sensation in those final moments. Your muscles convulse. Paralysis spreads through your nervous system. You can't swim. You can't flee. Within seconds, you're helpless, drifting, dying. The tentacle, through slow muscular contractions you cannot see or feel, begins drawing you upward toward the colony above. This is the Portuguese Man O War's hunting strategy, simple and brutally effective. It doesn't chase, it doesn't search. It hangs those venomous threads in the water and waits for prey to come to them. And in the open ocean, rich with life, prey always comes. The diet is diverse. Fish make up the majority, perhaps 70 to 90% of what they consume. These can be fish larvae, tiny and vulnerable, or small adult fish, perhaps juvenile flying fish, small mackerel, sardines, anchovies. They don't discriminate. If it's the right size to be captured and consumed, if it touches a tentacle, it becomes food. They also eat crustaceans, shrimp, small crabs, amphipods, copepods. They consume larval stages of various marine invertebrates. They capture chatagnaths, arrow worms, those transparent predators that themselves hunt through the plankton. They even capture larval eels, those mysterious leptocephalous larvae that drift through the ocean on their way to wherever they're going, depending on the species. Some of these larvae are heading toward freshwater rivers, but they'll never arrive. A Portuguese Man O War's tentacle ends their journey. The variety of prey reflects the variety of life at and near the ocean's surface. The pelagic zone, the top layer of the ocean where sunlight penetrates, is the ocean's most productive region. Phytoplankton bloom here, microscopic plants that turn sunlight into energy through photosynthesis. Zooplankton graze on the phytoplankton. Small fish eat the zooplankton. Larger fish eat the small fish. At every level, the Portuguese Man O War's tentacles sample this abundance, taking whatever they can catch. The tentacles themselves are remarkably effective tools. Each one is essentially a long series of repeated segments, each segment bearing batteries of nematocysts. The segments are flexible, able to stretch and contract, to curl and twist in the current. When prey is captured, coordinated muscular contractions along the tentacles slowly draw the prey upward. It's not a fast process. The muscles are smooth muscles, designed for slow, sustained contractions, rather than quick movements. The prey, paralyzed by venom, drifts upward centimeter by centimeter. If the prey is large, multiple tentacles may become involved, each one sticking to the victim, each one pulling. Eventually, after minutes or sometimes longer, the prey reaches the base of the colony where the gastrozooids wait. The gastrozooids respond to the presence of food. How they sense it isn't entirely clear. Perhaps chemical cues leak from the damaged prey. Perhaps mechanical signals travel through the colony's nervous system, simple as that system is. However it works, the gastrozooids writhe and extend, opening their mouths, reaching toward the captured meal. When a gastrozooid makes contact with prey, it spreads over the surface like a hand grasping an object. Its mouth opens wide, and digestive enzymes begin secreting. These enzymes break down protein, dissolving the flesh of the prey. The process is external digestion. The prey is not swallowed whole. It's liquefied outside the gastrozooid's body. Then the resulting nutritious soup is absorbed. Different gastrozooids may work on the same prey item, especially if it's large. A colony has multiple gastrozooids, each with its own mouth, each capable of independently processing food. It's cooperative digestion, though cooperative might be the wrong word, since these aren't really separate organisms cooperating, but rather different parts of the same organism working together, like your hand and mouth cooperate when you eat. The process takes hours. Slowly the prey dissolves. Bones, scales, shells, anything indigestible remains. Eventually these remnants are released, drop back into the water through the gastrozooid's mouth. The nutrients from the dissolved tissues flow through the colony's shared gastrovascular cavity, a network of interconnected spaces that serves as both digestive system and circulatory system. There's no separate blood system. Nutrients simply diffuse through this fluid-filled cavity, reaching all the zooids. This means a dactylozooid that captures prey receives nutrition from that capture. But so does the pneumatophore that never touches food. So do the gonozooids dedicated to reproduction. So does every other zooid in the colony. They're all fed by each capture. And in lean times when prey is scarce, they all share in the deprivation. There's no selfishness possible in an organism like this, no individual zooid hoarding resources. Success and failure are collective. But success can become a problem. When Portuguese Man O War appear in large numbers, when hundreds or thousands of colonies drift together in the same region, they can have measurable impacts on fish populations. Each colony catches and consumes fish daily. Multiply that by 1,000 colonies and you're removing thousands of fish from the ecosystem every day. Most of these are small fish or larvae, but in some cases, these are fish that commercial fisheries depend on. Studies have documented Portuguese Man O War blooms reducing local fishery catches. The colonies compete directly with human fishers for the same resource. And unlike fishing boats that eventually return to port, the colonies drift continuously, hunting 24 hours a day, never resting, never satisfied, simply continuing to exist, and therefore continuing to feed. They can also damage fishing gear. Nets dragged through areas with dense Portuguese Man O War populations come up full of stinging tentacles. Fishers handling these nets receive stings. The tentacles foul the nets, making them harder to clean, potentially damaging the mesh. It's a nuisance at best, a significant economic impact at worst. But there's another side to this story. Portuguese Man O War populations fluctuate. Bloom years alternate with quiet years. The factors that drive these fluctuations aren't entirely clear. Wind patterns play a role, determining where colonies accumulate. Sea surface temperatures matter, affecting survival and reproduction. Ocean currents shift, carrying colonies into or away from particular regions. What's clear is that Portuguese Man O War blooms have always happened, long before humans were fishing these waters. And in the vast context of ocean ecology, these blooms serve a purpose. They transfer energy from small fish and plankton up the food chain to the creatures that eat Portuguese Man O War. They select against fish that can't detect or avoid the tentacles, favoring fish that develop better sensory abilities or learn to recognize danger. They're predators, filling the niche of ambush predators in the surface waters, occupying a role that in other ecosystems might be filled by something else. Still, for the small fish encountering those tentacles, there's no ecological perspective, no understanding of roles and niches. There's just the sudden sting, the paralysis, the slow pull upward toward digestion and dissolution. There's the ending of an individual life to fuel the collective life of the colony. The Portuguese Man O War doesn't hunt with malice or mercy. It simply hangs its threads in the water and captures what touches them, converting protein and fat into the energy needed to maintain its float, grow its tentacles, eventually reproduce and continue its species drift across the endless surface of the sea. For all that we've learned about the Portuguese Man O War over centuries of observation, its reproduction remains largely mysterious. We know the basics. Male colonies and female colonies release sperm and eggs into the water. Fertilization occurs. A larva develops and grows into a new colony. But the details, the crucial specifics of where and when and how this happens, remain frustratingly out of reach. Part of the problem is simply that it's difficult to study. Portuguese Man O War live their lives at the ocean surface, drifting wherever wind and currents take them. They're not attached to any substrate we can return to. They don't gather in predictable locations. When scientists do find them, usually by accident or during dedicated research cruises, the colonies they find are typically floating at the surface, going about their normal business of hunting and drifting. The colonies aren't in the act of reproducing. The reproductive structures, the gonodendra, are tucked away beneath the float, not readily visible without carefully examining the colony, and even when scientists find gonodendra, they're usually not mature. The gonodophores, those sac-like structures that contain the ovaries or testes, are present but not yet full of ripe eggs or active sperm. There's a theory, supported by some evidence but not conclusively proven, that the gonodendra detach from the main colony when they mature. Remember those modified nectaphore structures we mentioned, the medusa-like zooids found on the gonodendra alongside the gonophores themselves? Scientists speculate that these might provide propulsion, allowing the detached gonodendron to swim through the water on its own, perhaps descending to some unknown depth where reproduction occurs. If this is true, it would explain why we never see mature Portuguese Man O War releasing gametes at the surface. The reproductive structures literally leave the colony, swim away and complete their function somewhere we haven't looked. It would be elegant, a way of spreading reproductive cells across depth ranges and locations rather than releasing everything right at the surface where the parent colony drifts. But we don't know if it's true. No one has observed gonodendra detaching. No one has found mature, free-floating gonodendra in the water column. The evidence is indirect. The presence of those nectaphores, which seem unnecessary if the gonodendron stays attached. The absence of mature gonodendra on surface floating colonies. The fact that fertilization has never been observed despite many researchers looking for it. What we do know is that each colony is either male or female, never hermaphroditic. All the gonozooids in a colony produce the same type of gametes. This means that for fertilization to occur, male and female colonies must be in proximity, not touching necessarily. The ocean is a fluid medium, and gametes can drift, but they need to be close enough that sperm released by male colonies have a reasonable chance of encountering eggs released by female colonies. This requirement for proximity might explain why Portuguese Man O War sometimes aggregate in large numbers. If reproduction requires a critical density of colonies, evolution would favor mechanisms that bring colonies together. Of course, the physical processes of wind and ocean currents naturally concentrate floating objects along convergence zones. But perhaps there are also biological signals, chemical cues released by mature colonies that influence the development or behavior of nearby colonies, though this is speculation with no direct evidence. Reproduction appears to be seasonal, at least in some populations. The greatest abundance of juvenile colonies, tiny floating collections of just a few zooids, appears during winter and spring in many regions. This suggests that reproduction happens primarily in autumn, with the larvae and juveniles developing through winter and becoming noticeable by spring. But this pattern isn't universal. In some tropical regions where temperature varies less throughout the year, reproduction might occur year-round. We don't know for certain. Once fertilization occurs, somewhere in the ocean depths or perhaps at the surface, development begins. The fertilized egg divides, forming a hollow ball of cells called a blastula, then gastrulating to form the basic body plan. At some point, the embryo transforms into a larva called a planula, a simple ciliated structure common to many cnidarians. This planula swims using its cilia, though how long it remains free swimming isn't clear. As the planula develops, it begins budding. The first zooids to appear are a small pneumatophore and a single early feeding zooid called a protozooid. This combination forms the basic foundation of the colony. The tiny pneumatophore, just a millimeter or so across, provides a bit of buoyancy, but not enough to float yet. The colony at this stage probably drifts below the surface, perhaps several meters down, continuing to develop. More zooids bud off, gastrozooids for digestion, dactylozooids bearing the first tentacles. The colony grows larger, more complex. The pneumatophore grows faster than the other zooids, accumulating gas, increasing in size. Eventually it reaches a threshold size where it provides enough buoyancy to lift the entire colony, tentacles and all, to the surface. This first ascent must be a critical moment in the colony's life, though of course the colony has no awareness, no sense of transition. One moment it's drifting in the dimmer light below the surface. The next, it breaches into bright sunlight, the pneumatophore breaking through the interface between water and air. Wind touches the crest of the float for the first time. The colony begins to drift, to sail, entering its life as a member of the Newston. It continues growing. New zooids bud off throughout the colony's life. New gastrozooids appear. Additional dactylozooids form, extending the colony's hunting reach. The tentacles themselves grow longer, adding new segments. The pneumatophore enlarges, maintaining the buoyancy needed to keep the growing colony afloat. Eventually, gonozooids develop and gonadendra begin to form. How long this development takes from fertilized egg to sexually mature colony is uncertain. Estimates suggest several months at minimum, perhaps as long as a year. The lifespan of a colony is also unclear. A year is often cited, but this is more guess than measurement. Some colonies surely die much younger, caught in unfavorable conditions, stranded on shore, eaten by predators, or simply failing to thrive. Others might live longer if conditions remain favorable. Throughout this life cycle, the colony grows but never changes its fundamental nature. It was born as a collection of zooids budding from a single embryo. It grows by adding more zooids through asexual budding. Every zooid in the colony shares the exact same DNA, genetic clones of one another, descended from that original fertilized egg. The colony is genetically a single individual, even though morphologically and functionally it's a collection of specialized parts. This dual nature, individual and collective, confuses our normal categories. When a Portuguese Man O War reproduces, what exactly is reproducing? Is it the individual zooids each genetically identical, collectively producing gametes? Or is it the colony as a whole, a superorganism creating the next generation? The answer depends on how you define individuality, and perhaps the question itself reveals more about our need for clear categories than about the creature's actual nature. What we can say with certainty is that reproduction happens somehow, somewhere, despite our ignorance of the details. Larvae develop, new colonies form. The species persists, generation after generation, drifting across tropical seas, hunting with venomous threads, growing from microscopic embryos into colonies with 100-foot tentacles, eventually producing gametes that create the next generation. The specifics remain hidden in the depths, waiting for some future researcher to finally observe them, to answer the questions that have persisted for so long. And perhaps there's something beautiful in that mystery, in knowing that even now, in an age where we've mapped the ocean floor and sequenced entire genomes, there are still basic biological processes happening all around us that we simply haven't seen. Life cycles playing out in secret, reproduction occurring just beyond our view, in depths we haven't reached or at moments we haven't witnessed. The Portuguese Man O War keeps its secrets, even as it drifts in plain sight on the ocean's surface, visible to anyone with eyes to see, yet concealing the most important moments of its existence in privacy the ocean provides. Everything in the ocean is food for something else. This is one of ecology's fundamental rules, and the Portuguese Man O War, despite its potent venom and painful sting, is no exception. In fact, several species have specialized to hunt this floating colony, to overcome its defenses, to turn its own weapons against it. These predator relationships reveal evolution's creativity, the endless arms race between eaters and eaten. Let's begin with the loggerhead sea turtle, a massive reptile that can weigh over 250 pounds, that swims thousands of miles across ocean basins, that returns to the same beaches where it hatched to lay its own eggs. The loggerhead is one of the few animals that regularly eats Portuguese man o' war and suffers no apparent ill effects from doing so. The secret to the loggerhead's immunity is surprisingly simple. Thick skin. The turtle's skin, particularly around its head, neck, and in its mouth and throat, is tough enough that the Portuguese man o' war's nematocysts cannot penetrate it. The barbed threads fire, strike the turtle's skin and bounce off or break. They can't deliver their venom payload. To a loggerhead, a Portuguese man o' war is just a meal, nutritious and readily available. Loggerheads actively hunt these colonies. They patrol the surface waters, looking for the distinctive purple floats. When they find one, they approach and bite, using their powerful beaks to sever the tentacles or crush the pneumatophore. The turtle swallows the pieces, digesting the gelatinous tissue, extracting nutrients from protein and whatever else the colony's tissues contain. This predation can be significant. In regions where loggerheads are common, they may be one of the major factors controlling Portuguese man o' war populations. Each turtle can consume multiple colonies per day during feeding periods. Over the course of a year, a single loggerhead might eat hundreds of these colonies. The ocean sunfish, or mola mola, is another major predator. This bizarre-looking fish, which can weigh over 5,000 pounds, making it the heaviest bony fish in the ocean, drifts through surface and mid-depth waters, feeding on gelatinous organisms. Its diet includes jellyfish, salps, and yes, Portuguese man o' war. The sunfish's strategy differs from the turtle's. Instead of thick skin making it immune to stings, the sunfish apparently has some form of internal tolerance to the venom, possibly specific antigens or antibodies that neutralize the toxins. It can be stung, but the stings don't seem to cause serious harm. The fish simply swims through clusters of Portuguese man o' war, mouth open, consuming them along with other gelatinous prey. This diet might seem poor in nutrition. Gelatinous organisms are mostly water, with relatively little protein or fat compared to fish or crustaceans. But the ocean sunfish compensates with volume. It eats enormous quantities. And in the open ocean where gelatinous organisms are abundant, this strategy works. The sunfish grows to enormous size on a diet that most other fish would starve on. But perhaps the most fascinating predator of the Portuguese man o' war is the blanket octopus, specifically males and immature females of this species. Adult female blanket octopuses are huge by octopus standards, growing up to 6.5 feet long. Males, in one of nature's most extreme examples of sexual dimorphism, grow to about an inch, roughly the size of a walnut. A female can weigh 40,000 times more than a male. It's one of the largest size differences between males and females in the entire animal kingdom. These octopuses, particularly the small males and young females, have evolved complete immunity to Portuguese man o' war venom. Immunity in this case means the venom simply doesn't affect them. The toxins that paralyze fish and cause excruciating pain in humans have no effect on the blanket octopus's tissues. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but it works perfectly. And the blanket octopus doesn't just resist the venom, it weaponizes it. When a blanket octopus encounters a Portuguese man o' war, it swims close, grabs a tentacle with its arms, and rips it free from the colony. The octopus doesn't eat this tentacle. Instead, it carries it, wielding it like a whip or a sword. The nematocysts in that severed tentacle remain active. They're still loaded, still ready to fire. When a predator threatens the octopus lashes out with its stolen weapon, hitting the predator with the tentacle, causing the nematocysts to discharge into the predator's flesh. The predator receives a full dose of Portuguese man o' war venom and quickly learns to avoid blanket octopuses. It's tool use, and remarkably sophisticated tool use at that. The octopus recognizes the Portuguese man o' war not as prey but as a source of weapons. It understands at whatever level octopuses understand things that these tentacles can harm other animals but not itself. It remembers where it left its weapons, carrying them for extended periods, sometimes days. When threatened, it knows to use the weapon to strike with it. This behavior is found in males and immature females, but not in mature females. Mature females are so large, so formidable, that they apparently don't need the protection. They can intimidate most predators with their size and their blanket-like webbing that they can unfurl to appear even larger. But males, tiny and vulnerable, and young females still growing toward their impressive adult size benefit enormously from carrying these venomous tentacles. Another Portuguese man o' war predator is the blue dragon sea slug, also called Glaucus atlanticus. This is a small nudibranch, rarely more than an inch long, that floats upside down at the ocean surface, its blue side facing up toward the sky and its silver side facing down toward the depths, a form of countershading that provides camouflage. The blue dragon actively hunts Portuguese man o' war. It approaches a colony, attaches to the tentacles or float, and begins feeding, biting off pieces and consuming them. As it feeds, it doesn't digest the nematocysts. Instead, specialized cells in its digestive tract separate the nematocysts from the rest of the tissue and transport them to the slug's skin, particularly to finger-like projections called serrata that extend from its body. The nematocysts are stored in these serrata, concentrated there, still functional. Now the blue dragon has its own stinging defenses, borrowed directly from its prey. Any animal that tries to eat the blue dragon gets a sting that's actually more potent than the Portuguese man o' war's original sting because the slug has concentrated the nematocysts. It's toxin appropriation, a strategy called kleptoknidae in scientific literature, literally stealing stinging cells. Several other sea slug species do this with different cnidarian prey, but the blue dragon's relationship with the Portuguese man o' war is one of the most dramatic examples. Other predators include violet sea snails, which float on the surface using mucus-filled bubble rafts and feed on various surface-dwelling organisms, including Portuguese man o' war. Sand crabs sometimes eat stranded colonies on beaches. Various fish species will opportunistically consume them if they can manage to do so without getting stung too severely. But most animals avoid them. The venom is too potent, the risk too high. Even large predatory fish that could easily consume a Portuguese man o' war usually don't. The lesson is learned young: those purple floats mean pain. Avoid them. This combination of chemical defense through venom and relatively few specialized predators means Portuguese man o' war face less predation pressure than many open ocean organisms. Yes, loggerheads eat them. Yes, sunfish consume them. But compared to the predation faced by small fish or plankton, the Portuguese man o' war lives a relatively safe existence. It's the opposite of most ocean life, where everything is constantly at risk of being eaten. Yet this safety comes with costs. The colony cannot swim away from threats. It cannot hide. It drifts at the surface, visible to any predator that learns to overcome its defenses. When loggerheads are abundant, when sunfish are feeding, the colonies simply absorb these losses and persist through reproduction. There's no adaptation available to help. No way to evolve faster drifting or better hiding when you're fundamentally committed to floating at the surface. And so the food web turns. Portuguese man o' war hunt small fish and plankton. Loggerheads and sunfish hunt Portuguese man o' war. The very few predators that eat loggerheads and sunfish, mostly large sharks and perhaps killer whales, indirectly benefit from Portuguese man o' war. Energy flows up the chain, from sunlight captured by phytoplankton, through zooplankton and small fish, through the Portuguese man o' war's venomous tentacles, into the bodies of turtles and fish, and onward. Every organism is both hunter and hunted, both consumer and consumed, in the endless cycling of life through life. To live at the ocean's surface is to inhabit one of Earth's most extreme environments. The Neuston, that community of organisms permanently residing at the air-water interface, faces challenges that neither truly aquatic organisms nor terrestrial ones fully experience. It's a borderland, a liminal space, neither entirely water nor air but something between, a thin film of existence at the boundary of two worlds. Consider the sun. In the ocean depths, light fades quickly. By 200 meters down, virtually no sunlight remains. Organisms at those depths live in twilight or darkness. But at the surface, sunlight is relentless. There's no water above to filter it, no depth to hide in. Every ray of UV radiation that reaches the ocean strikes the surface directly, and organisms living there absorb the full dose. UV radiation damages DNA. It breaks chemical bonds in proteins. It generates reactive oxygen species that harm cells. Most organisms protect themselves by living under a layer of water, or by producing UV-absorbing pigments, or by simply avoiding the surface during the brightest hours. But the Portuguese Man O War has no choice. It floats continuously at the surface, exposed to tropical sun, hour after hour, day after day. Its translucent blue and purple coloration isn't just camouflage. Those colors come from pigments that likely absorb harmful UV wavelengths, protecting the underlying tissues from radiation damage. The thick outer layer of the pneumatophore acts as a shield, a buffer between the delicate internal tissues and the harsh environment outside. Still, the colony must suffer some UV damage simply from the intensity and duration of exposure. This is one cost of life in the Neuston. Then there's the problem of desiccation. Water molecules constantly evaporate from the ocean surface, especially in tropical regions where air temperature is high and humidity can be variable. An organism floating at the surface, partially exposed to air, faces the risk of drying out. The pneumatophore is particularly vulnerable, projecting above the waterline into the air. The Portuguese Man O War mitigates this risk in several ways. The float's surface is relatively impermeable, limiting water loss. The colony can deliberately deflate the pneumatophore and submerge temporarily if conditions become too dry or if strong winds threaten to tear it apart. When submerged, the entire colony is bathed in water, rehydrating any tissues that lost moisture. But there's a trade-off. Submerging means not catching wind, not traveling, not hunting as effectively. The tentacles work best when trailing from a drifting colony, spreading out in the water as the colony moves forward. When submerged, everything collapses together, tangling, less efficient. So the colony surfaces again as soon as possible, accepting the risk of desiccation as the price of mobility and effective hunting. Wave action presents another challenge. The ocean surface is rarely calm. Wind generates waves from small ripples to storm-driven monsters. A Portuguese Man O War colony floating on the surface rides these waves, rising and falling, tilting and tumbling. In moderate seas, this is manageable. The colony is flexible enough to bend without breaking, to rise up the face of a wave and slide down the back. But in storms, the violence increases. Waves break over the float. The tentacles are jerked and twisted. The entire colony can be thrown about, submerged repeatedly, possibly torn apart by sheer mechanical stress. Many colonies probably die in storms, destroyed by the same forces that normally just provide movement and mixing. Yet storms also bring opportunities. The turbulence mixes nutrients from deeper water to the surface. Phytoplankton bloom in the days after a storm passes. Zooplankton proliferate, feeding on the phytoplankton. Small fish arrive to eat the zooplankton. And the Portuguese Man O War's tentacles, once the storm passes, hang in water enriched with potential prey. The colonies that survive storms find themselves in temporarily abundant feeding conditions. Temperature at the surface fluctuates more than in deeper water. During the day, particularly in calm conditions, the surface layer heats up. Water at the very surface can be several degrees warmer than water just a few meters down. At night, this heat radiates away, and the surface cools. The Portuguese Man O War experiences these temperature swings directly. Its tolerance range determines where it can live. If water temperatures drop below its thermal minimum, the colony's metabolism slows, its zooids function poorly, and it may die. This temperature sensitivity explains why Portuguese Man O War are restricted to tropical and subtropical waters. They can tolerate the occasional excursion into temperate regions when warm currents and winds carry them north or south from their usual range, but prolonged exposure to cooler water is fatal. The species simply hasn't evolved the biochemical machinery to function in cold water. The Neuston also faces unique predation pressures. From below, fish and other aquatic predators see the Portuguese Man O War silhouetted against the bright sky, making it visible despite its translucent coloring. From above, seabirds scan the surface for prey. The colony's purple float, while camouflaged against blue waves, isn't invisible. Birds sometimes attack, pecking at the float or grabbing tentacles, though they learn quickly to avoid them after getting stung. Defense against aerial predators is limited. The colony can't flee. Its only option is deflation and temporary submersion, useful against a persistent bird, but not a permanent solution. And some seabirds may learn to grab the float itself, lifting the colony partially out of the water where it can't submerge and carrying it to a perch to consume at leisure, though this behavior hasn't been widely documented. But perhaps the greatest challenge of Neuston life is simply the vastness and emptiness of the habitat. The ocean surface is huge, covering about 71% of Earth's surface, nearly 140 million square miles. But most of this surface is open water, far from shore, with no structure, no shelter, no fixed reference points. A Portuguese man o' war colony drifting here could go days or weeks without encountering another colony, without passing near any island or shore, just drifting endlessly across blue emptiness. For reproduction, this isolation is problematic. Remember that male and female colonies need to be in proximity for fertilization to occur. In the vastness of the open ocean, this proximity can't be guaranteed. Evolution has responded with strategies to increase the chances, aggregation in convergence zones where floating objects concentrate, possible chemical signaling between colonies, the ability to produce large numbers of gametes that can drift over considerable distances. But even with these adaptations, many colonies probably live and die without ever reproducing, simply because they never encountered the right conditions, never drifted close enough to colonies of the opposite sex at the right time. This is the price of living in so vast a habitat with no ability to control your own movement. Yet the Portuguese man o' war has persisted for millions of years, thriving in this extreme environment that so few other organisms have managed to exploit. The species has found its niche at this boundary between worlds, has evolved the adaptations necessary to survive UV radiation, desiccation, temperature fluctuations, wave action, and the vastness of the open ocean. It floats on, these colonies of living threads, making the best of a habitat that would kill most creatures, turning constraints into opportunities, existing where few others can, a testament to life's ability to adapt to even the most challenging conditions Earth has to offer. There are years when they seem to be everywhere. News reports proliferate. Portuguese man o' war swarm beaches. Swimmers stung by dozens of people in a single day. Purple flags raised along miles of coastline. Tourism takes a hit as visitors avoid the water. Lifeguards patrol with nets, trying to remove colonies before they can sting anyone. These are bloom years, when Portuguese man o' war populations explode in particular regions. When currents and winds conspire to concentrate thousands of colonies in places where humans notice them. And then there are quiet years, when sightings are rare, when beaches remain open, when the creatures fade from public consciousness. The Portuguese man o' war doesn't disappear during these years. They're still out there, drifting across the open ocean, but they're dispersed, scattered, far from shore, occupying the vast spaces where no one notices them. What drives these cycles of boom and quiet? Part of the answer lies in ocean conditions. Sea surface temperature affects Portuguese man o' war survival and reproduction. In warmer years, more colonies survive, more larvae develop successfully, populations grow. In cooler years, mortality increases, fewer larvae reach maturity, populations shrink. Wind patterns matter enormously. Remember that these colonies are entirely at the mercy of wind. Prevailing winds from certain directions push them toward shore. Winds from other directions push them out to sea. During winter months along the Gulf Coast of the United States, southeasterly winds blow Portuguese man o' war from offshore waters toward beaches. This is predictable enough that locals know to watch for them in December, January, February. Come spring, wind patterns shift and the colonies are pushed back offshore. But some years, the winds are stronger or more persistent than usual. More colonies are pushed ashore, or the population offshore is larger to begin with due to favorable conditions the previous year. These factors combine, and suddenly beaches are inundated. Where you might normally see a few colonies scattered across miles of sand, now there are hundreds in a small area, and the water just offshore contains thousands more, all their tentacles creating a deadly gauntlet for any swimmer. Ocean currents play a similar role. The Gulf Stream, the Loop Current in the Gulf of Mexico, the Kuroshio Current in the Pacific. All of these major current systems transport Portuguese man o' war over vast distances. Most of the time, these colonies remain in the open ocean, far from shore. But occasionally, eddies spin off from the main current and push toward the coast, carrying their load of colonies with them. When this happens, beaches that rarely see Portuguese man o' war suddenly face an invasion. Climate change is altering these patterns. As ocean temperatures rise, the range of Portuguese man o' war expands. Colonies appear in regions where they were previously rare or absent. Massachusetts beaches, where Portuguese man o' war were almost unknown a few decades ago, now see them regularly. British and Irish coasts, historically at the northern edge of the species range, are experiencing more frequent and larger arrivals. Warmer water also extends the season during which Portuguese Man O War can survive at higher latitudes. Where they might have been restricted to the warmest summer months, they can now persist from spring through autumn. This means more months of potential exposure for people using these beaches. The strandings themselves create a hazard that persists even after the colony dies. A Portuguese Man O War washes ashore, perhaps during high tide or pushed by storm waves. The float deflates or ruptures. The tentacles lie tangled on the sand. Hours pass. The sun beats down. The tissues dry and shrivel. To any casual observer, it looks dead, harmless, perhaps even vaguely interesting, something to poke at with a stick or pick up to examine. But those nematocysts remain loaded. Desiccation doesn't discharge them. Death doesn't disarm them. The cells may be dead, their metabolism stopped, but the physical mechanism within each nematocyst is still intact, still under pressure, still ready to fire. Touch that dried tentacle, and you'll discover that death has not made it safe. Children are particularly vulnerable to this. They find interesting things on beaches and pick them up. The distinctive purple float, once dried and deflated, might look like a toy balloon. Tentacles dried into papery threads don't obviously appear dangerous. Parents may not know to warn their children about them. The sting comes as a complete surprise, all the more traumatic for being unexpected. The medical response to Portuguese Man O War stings has evolved. For years, advice varied wildly. Some sources recommended urine, others vinegar, others ammonia or baking soda. Much of this advice was either ineffective or actively harmful. Urine, despite its prevalence in pop culture thanks to that infamous Friends episode, doesn't help and might make things worse. Vinegar, the correct treatment for box jellyfish stings, can actually cause additional nematocyst discharge in Portuguese Man O War, delivering more venom. Current best practice, based on research rather than folk wisdom, recommends the following steps. First, don't touch the tentacles with bare hands. Use gloves, a towel, a stick, anything to avoid direct contact. Carefully remove visible tentacles from the skin. Rinse the area with seawater, not fresh water. Fresh water can cause additional nematocyst discharge due to osmotic changes. Then comes the most effective intervention: heat. Immerse the affected area in water, as hot as can be safely tolerated, ideally between 107 and 113 degrees Fahrenheit, for 20 to 45 minutes. This temperature breaks down some of the venom proteins and provides remarkable pain relief. Many people report that the pain, which can be excruciating, significantly decreases within minutes of heat application. If hot water isn't available, commercial products like Sting No More spray and cream, which contain components specifically designed to inhibit the venom after injection, have shown good results in clinical trials. But heat remains the most accessible and effective immediate treatment. For most people, a Portuguese Man O War sting, while painful, isn't life-threatening. The pain peaks within the first hour and gradually subsides over the next several hours. The welts may remain for 2 or 3 days, itching and occasionally painful, but they heal without permanent scarring in most cases. But complications can occur. The venom can trigger allergic reactions in sensitive individuals in extreme cases. These reactions escalate into anaphylaxis, a potentially fatal systemic response. Symptoms include swelling of the throat and tongue, difficulty breathing, rapid heartbeat, dizziness, and loss of consciousness. This requires immediate emergency medical treatment. Even without allergy, massive stings can deliver enough venom to cause systemic effects. Multiple tentacles wrapping around limbs or torso, or someone falling into a bloom and becoming entangled, can result in cardiovascular effects, difficulty breathing, shock. There are documented deaths from Portuguese Man O War envenomation, though they're rare. The psychological impact of being stung shouldn't be underestimated. The pain is intense, frightening, and in the case of swimmers stung in deep water, can cause panic that leads to drowning even if the venom itself wouldn't be fatal. Teaching people what Portuguese Man O War look like, warning them when colonies are present, and providing clear information about treatment reduces both the frequency of stings and their severity when they occur. Purple flags on beaches serve this warning function. When lifeguards or beach patrols spot Portuguese Man O War in the water or on the sand, they raise these flags to alert visitors. Some beaches close entirely during major bloom events, refusing to allow swimming until the colonies move on. It's a conservative approach, perhaps overly so, but it prevents stings and the liability that comes with them. As climate continues to change, as ocean currents shift and temperatures rise, we can expect the patterns of Portuguese Man O War blooms to change. Some regions may see more frequent blooms, others might see them at new times of year. Northward expansion of their range seems likely to continue. This means more human encounters, more stings, and a growing need for public education about these remarkable creatures and how to safely coexist with them in shared coastal spaces. Because, despite the pain they can cause, despite the disruption to tourism and recreation, Portuguese Man O War aren't villains. They're not attacking humans deliberately. They have no conception of humans at all. They're simply drifting, hunting, living their lives as evolution designed them to. That their defense mechanism affects us painfully is incidental. The ocean is their home. When we enter it, we accept the risks that come with entering their habitat, with sharing space with creatures that have occupied these waters for millions of years before humans existed, and will likely occupy them long after we're gone. For a creature that floats in plain sight on the ocean's surface, that's been known to science for centuries, that's common enough to regularly interfere with human beach activities. The Portuguese Man O War remains surprisingly mysterious. There are fundamental aspects of its biology and ecology that we simply don't understand. Questions that seem like they should be answerable, but have eluded every researcher who has tried. Start with reproduction. We've discussed this already, but it bears repeating because it's such a glaring gap in our knowledge. No one has ever observed fertilization in Portuguese Man O War. No one has found freshly fertilized eggs in the wild. No one has tracked early larval development in situ. Everything we know about the early life stages comes from fixed specimens collected in plankton trawls, dead larvae and juveniles preserved at various developmental stages that scientists have tried to arrange into a sequence, guessing at the progression from stage to stage. We believe that gonadendra detach from mature colonies and swim to some depth where gamete release occurs. We believe this because it makes sense given the structures we see, but we have no direct evidence. No one has watched a gonadendron detach. No one has followed one as it descended. We don't know what depth they reach, what environmental cues trigger gamete release, how sperm find eggs in the vastness of the ocean. Is there seasonality to reproduction? We think so, based on when juveniles appear in collections, but we don't know for certain. In tropical waters where temperature varies little year-round, does reproduction occur continuously, or are there still seasonal cues we haven't identified? How long does development take from fertilized egg to sexually mature colony? Estimates range from months to over a year, but these are educated guesses, not measurements from tracked individuals. We don't even know how long a Portuguese Man O War colony lives. A year is the commonly cited lifespan, but this is more tradition than data. Some colonies might live longer, others surely die much younger, without being able to track individual colonies throughout their lives, which is nearly impossible given that they drift unpredictably across thousands of miles of open ocean. We can't answer this basic question. The depths at which different life stages occur remain unknown. We find adults at the surface, obviously. But where are the larvae? At what depth does the early colony develop before its pneumatophore grows large enough to float? Some must be at the surface or near it, because that's where plankton trawls have collected them. But others might spend extended periods deeper, protected from surface conditions until they're robust enough to survive there. The ecology of the open ocean, where Portuguese Man O War spend most of their lives, is vastly understudied compared to coastal or deep-sea environments. It's harder to study, requiring ships that can stay at sea for long periods, specialized equipment, and the luck to find colonies in the right conditions. Most of what we know about Portuguese Man O War comes from specimens encountered near shore or washed up on beaches, which may not be representative of the population as a whole. Do colonies have any way of sensing their environment beyond the immediate chemical and mechanical cues that trigger nematocyst discharge and gastrozooid feeding responses? Can they detect light, temperature, current? Siphonophores in general have relatively simple nervous systems, nerve nets without central processing, but that doesn't mean they can't respond to environmental gradients. We don't know the extent of their sensory abilities. How do they navigate? if navigate is even the right word for creatures that drift passively. Obviously, wind and current determine their large-scale movements, but within those constraints, is there any control? Can they angle themselves to catch wind more or less effectively? Can they selectively deflate parts of the pneumatophore to alter their sailing characteristics? Or are they truly passive particles, going exactly where physics dictates? The genetics of Portuguese Man O War are poorly studied. We don't even know for certain whether all Portuguese Man O War constitute a single worldwide species, or whether there are multiple cryptic species that look similar but are genetically distinct. The Pacific form, sometimes called P, or triculus, characterized by a smaller float and single long fishing tentacle, might be a separate species, or might just be a juvenile or regional variant of P. physalis. Genetic analysis could answer this, but comprehensive global sampling hasn't been done. How is sex determined? What genetic mechanism makes some colonies male and others female? In many organisms, sex is determined by chromosomes or environmental factors. In Portuguese Man O War, we don't know. This seems like a simple question that molecular biology should be able to answer quickly, but no one has done the work. The relationship with other species in the Newston community is poorly understood. We know that certain fish species associate with Portuguese Man O War living among their tentacles, but we don't know how many species do this or what benefits they derive. We know that Portuguese Man O War sometimes aggregate in large numbers, but we don't know if this is purely physical, simply where currents concentrate floating objects, or whether there's active attraction between colonies. The immune system, such as it exists in these creatures, is a mystery. How do they fight off infections? Cnidarians in general have ancient, simple immune systems, but the specifics for Portuguese Man O War haven't been characterized. Given that they live at the ocean surface where bacterial concentrations can be high, and given that wounds from predators or environmental damage must occasionally occur, they must have some way of preventing or fighting infections. The role of the microbiome, the community of bacteria and other microorganisms living in and on the colony, is completely unstudied. Most marine organisms host complex microbial communities that contribute to digestion, immunity, and other functions. Does the Portuguese Man O War? If so, which species? What are they doing? How does the colony acquire its microbiome? Climate change effects, beyond simple range expansion, are speculative. Will warmer oceans lead to more frequent blooms? Will changing wind patterns alter their distribution? Will ocean acidification affect them? And if so, how? These are important questions for predicting future impacts on ecosystems and human activities, but we have almost no data to answer them. The evolution of colonial life in siphonophores, including Portuguese Man O War, raises fascinating questions. How did separate zooids become so specialized and interdependent? What were the intermediate stages? What genetic changes allowed a single embryo to produce multiple body types, each committed to a different function? These are deep evolutionary questions that touch on fundamental issues about individuality, cooperation, and the nature of multicellular life. All of these unknowns, all these gaps in our understanding, persist despite centuries of study. Part of the problem is methodological. Portuguese Man O War are difficult to keep in captivity. They drift at the surface, where their tentacles can tangle, where they can strand against tank walls, where water quality is difficult to maintain. Aquariums occasionally display them, but keeping them alive long-term is challenging, and studying reproduction or development in captivity hasn't been achieved. Part of the problem is simply that studying open ocean organisms requires going to the open ocean, staying there, finding the organisms, observing them in their natural environment, and this is expensive, logistically complex, and dependent on weather and luck. Compared to studying a coral reef or a rocky shore, both accessible by day-trip boat and where organisms stay put, studying Portuguese Man O War is vastly more difficult. But perhaps the most fundamental problem is that we haven't prioritized it. These creatures don't have obvious economic value. They're not endangered. They're not directly important to fisheries or ecosystem services that humans care about. Yes, they sting swimmers, but managing that is mostly a matter of public awareness and beach closures during bloom events. There's little incentive to fund expensive research cruises to study their reproductive behavior or to develop genetic tools for this one particular species. So the mysteries persist. The Portuguese Man O War continues to drift across tropical seas, reproducing somehow, living for some period of time, responding to its environment in ways we don't fully understand, occupying a niche in the ocean ecosystem that we haven't fully characterized. It exists, thrives even, while we watch from shore and wonder about the details of its hidden life, about the processes occurring beneath that purple float, about the experiences, if any, of a colonial organism that is simultaneously one and many, a creature that confounds our categories and resists our attempts to fully know it. In the shadow of those venomous tentacles, in the space beneath the drifting float, a small ecosystem exists. Certain species have evolved the remarkable ability to live in intimate association with Portuguese Man O War, to shelter among those stinging threads that would kill most creatures, to turn the colony's deadly defenses into their own protection. These relationships reveal evolution's creativity, the way life finds advantage even in the most unlikely places. The most famous of these associates is the man-of-war fish, Nomias granovi. This is a small fish, rarely more than 6 inches long, that lives its entire life accompanying Portuguese Man O War colonies. You find one, you'll usually find the other. The fish swims among the tentacles, weaving between those trailing threads with remarkable precision, somehow avoiding contact with the nematocysts that would paralyze and kill it. How does it do this? Partly through skill and awareness. The fish can see the tentacles, at least in good light, and it learns their positions, their movements in the current, the safe paths between them. It swims carefully, deliberately, maintaining distance. But this can't be the whole explanation, because the tentacles move constantly, trailing in complex three-dimensional shapes that change with every shift in current or wind. No fish could be precise enough to avoid all contact through skill alone. Research has shown that man-of-war fish have at least partial immunity to the venom. They possess antibodies or antigens that neutralize some of the toxic effects. A sting that would paralyze another fish of the same size causes less severe effects in Nomias. The fish can tolerate a brief touch, a glancing contact with a tentacle, without immediately dying. But it's not completely immune. Hard contact, prolonged exposure, or multiple stings can still overwhelm its defenses. So the fish practices avoidance when possible, relying on its partial immunity only when mistakes happen or when actively feeding on the tentacles themselves, which it does, nibbling at the trailing threads and the gonads of the colony. This creates an interesting relationship. The fish benefits enormously from its association with the Portuguese Man O War. It gains protection from predators. Few creatures will attack a fish swimming among venomous tentacles. The fish is relatively safe from aerial predators like seabirds and from other fish that might otherwise eat it. It also gains food directly from the colony, consuming pieces of the tentacles and other tissues. What does the colony gain? Possibly nothing. Some researchers consider this relationship commensalism, where one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor helped. But there's an alternative interpretation. The presence of the fish might actually benefit the colony by attracting other fish. Picture it from the perspective of a small fish in the open ocean. You see another fish of similar size swimming in open water. Perhaps it's near some object, maybe a floating log or mass of seaweed. Your instinct is to approach. Schools offer safety in numbers. Perhaps there's food, so you swim closer. The man-of-war fish doesn't flee. It just continues swimming. You get nearer, and suddenly you're among those tentacles you didn't see, receiving a fatal sting. The Portuguese Man O War has captured you, and the man-of-war fish continues swimming, serving as unwitting bait. If this is accurate, the relationship would be mutualistic, not commensal. Both species benefit. The fish gets protection and food. The colony gets additional prey, attracted by the fish's presence. It would be a fascinating example of one organism weaponizing another organism's social instincts. Another common associate is the yellow jack, Caranx bartholomei, a larger fish that sometimes swims near Portuguese Man O War colonies without living among the tentacles quite as intimately as Nomias does. The yellow jack maintains a looser association, staying nearby but not actually entering the tentacle zone. It likely benefits from the colony's presence by catching fish that are trying to escape the tentacles or by picking up scraps from the colony's feeding. Various species of young fish, juveniles of larger species, occasionally take shelter near Portuguese Man O War. For these small, vulnerable life stages, the temporary protection offered by proximity to venomous tentacles might outweigh the risks. They don't have the specialized immunity of nomias, so they keep more distance, but they still benefit from predators' reluctance to attack anything near a Portuguese Man O War. There are likely other associations we haven't discovered. The open ocean is poorly studied compared to coastal waters, and the specific community of organisms associated with Portuguese Man O War hasn't been comprehensively surveyed. Small crustaceans might live on the float or among the tentacles. Larval fish might deliberately seek out colonies for protection during vulnerable life stages. Bacteria and other microorganisms certainly colonize the colony, though whether these are symbiotic or simply opportunistic isn't known. One particularly interesting question is whether any organisms specifically follow Portuguese Man O War, tracking them through the ocean, maintaining association over time. The man of war fish clearly does this, staying with a specific colony or group of colonies for extended periods. But do any predators follow Portuguese Man O War populations, knowing that where these colonies concentrate, prey will also concentrate? Loggerhead turtles migrate thousands of miles and might deliberately route their migrations to intersect with known Portuguese Man O War aggregation zones. Ocean sunfish might do the same. This would require not just knowing where Portuguese Man O War occur, but predicting where they'll drift to based on seasonal wind and current patterns. It's speculation, but not impossible. Many marine predators make sophisticated use of environmental cues to predict prey locations. The relationships between Portuguese Man O War and their associates illuminate a broader principle in ecology, that every organism, no matter how specialized or defended, creates opportunities for other organisms. The venomous tentacles that protect the colony also create a niche for any species that can evolve resistance or immunity. The drifting float provides a hard surface in the open ocean, a substrate for attachment in an environment where such substrates are rare. Even the colony's waste, whatever isn't absorbed during digestion, becomes food for bacteria and other decomposers, entering the microbial loop that processes organic matter in the ocean. The colony's death, when it comes, provides a bonanza for scavengers, all that gelatinous protein drifting downward or washing ashore. In this way, even an organism as isolated as the Portuguese Man O War, drifting alone on the ocean surface with no permanent home, creates a small ecosystem around itself. It's not just a predator, it's a resource, a shelter, a substrate, a food source, depending on what other organism we're considering. Life finds a way to exploit every niche, every opportunity, even the space among the tentacles of one of the ocean's most venomous creatures. As we drift toward the end of our journey, let's rest here for a moment in gentle contemplation of what we've explored. The Portuguese Man O War, Phasalia phasalias. This extraordinary colony of living threads floating across tropical seas, carrying its venomous tentacles through sunlit waters, hunting and feeding, and reproducing, and drifting for millions of years before humans walked on land, and presumably millions of years after we're gone. There's something humbling about studying a creature like this. We think we understand life. We categorize organisms into species, into families, into kingdoms. We draw neat boundaries between individual and colony, between organism and organ. And then something like the Portuguese Man O War appears and refuses to fit our categories cleanly, existing in that liminal space between one and many, challenging us to reconsider what we mean when we talk about being alive, about being an individual. Is it one organism? Yes. In that all its parts share the same genetic code, developed from the same fertilized egg, function together as a coordinated whole, with no part capable of independent survival. Is it many organisms? Yes, in that each zooid is technically a separate body, with its own specialization, its own tissues, descended through budding from others, but still physiologically distinct. The answer, perhaps, is that our question is wrong. Nature doesn't care about our categories. The Portuguese Man O War simply is what it is. A colony, an organism, a collection of specialists, a floating community of threads, all of these descriptions true and none complete. And in that incompleteness, in that inability to fully categorize and capture this creature in words, there's a reminder that the ocean still holds mysteries, still challenges our understanding, still produces forms of life that astonish us when we finally look closely enough to see them. We live in an age where we've mapped most of Earth's surface, where satellites photograph every coastline, where we can sequence entire genomes in days. Yet the Portuguese Man O War's reproduction remains mysterious. Its full life cycle has never been observed. Basic questions about its ecology remain unanswered. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps not every mystery needs solving immediately. Perhaps there's value in knowing that somewhere out there, right now, Portuguese Man O War colonies are drifting across warm seas, reproducing in ways we haven't witnessed, living lives we don't fully understand, occupying their ancient niche at the ocean's surface while we sleep safely on land. You are part of this ocean too, in a deeper way than you might realize. The water you drink has cycled through oceans many times. The oxygen you breathe comes partially from oceanic phytoplankton. The iron in your blood, essential for carrying oxygen through your body, was forged in the heart of an ancient star that exploded long before Earth formed, scattering its elements into space, some eventually gathering into our planet, some dissolved in the ocean, some taken up by marine organisms, some eventually making their way to land and into the food chains that ultimately nourished your ancestors and now nourish you. In this sense, you and the Portuguese Man O War are kin, distant relatives separated by vast evolutionary time, but sharing the same ultimate origin in the chemical elements synthesized in stellar furnaces billions of years ago. You breathe. It exchanges gases through its tissues. You hunt for food in your way. It hunts in its way. You reproduce, though through a vastly different mechanism. It reproduces, releasing gametes into the sea. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, colonies of Portuguese Man O War are drifting on the surface of warm seas under southern stars or under tropical sun, depending on which hemisphere we're talking about and what time it is there. Their tentacles trail downward, sampling the water for prey. Their pneumatophores catch wind, pushing them forward on journeys they don't choose and cannot stop. They have no awareness of you, no concept that humans exist, no understanding that we've given them names and studied them and puzzled over their nature. They simply exist, doing what evolution shaped them to do, surviving as their species has survived for millennia, filling their ecological role with the same blind precision that all life uses, the precision of adaptation, of natural selection, of traits that work being passed to the next generation, while traits that don't work vanish into extinction. There is beauty in this, not the aesthetic beauty of a sunset, though the Portuguese Man O War's iridescent colors have their own visual appeal, but a deeper beauty, the beauty of complexity arising from simple rules, of specialization emerging from generalists, of cooperation arising between organisms or parts of organisms that benefit from mutual support. The beauty of a solution to the problem of survival that works, that has worked across millions of years, that will presumably continue working as long as tropical oceans exist and as long as wind blows across their surface. Let yourself sink deeper into rest now. Let your breathing slow further. Imagine you could feel what it's like to be that colony, to have no muscles to move yourself, to drift entirely at wind's mercy, to trail tentacles downward into blue depths, to capture prey you never see coming, to digest it through polyps. You have no central brain to coordinate yet, which coordinate themselves through simple chemical and electrical signals passing through a nerve net. Imagine having no destination, no territory, no home, except the ever-changing surface of the sea. Imagine existence as pure process, as continuous being in the present moment, with no planning for tomorrow, because there is no capacity for planning, only automatic responses to immediate stimuli, only the moment-by-moment chemistry of life playing out in specialized zooids that together constitute something greater than any of them alone. This is how most life exists, actually. Responding to immediate conditions, surviving or not surviving based on fitness and luck, continuing forward without understanding or needing to understand the forces that shape it. Only a few species have evolved enough cognitive complexity to ponder their own existence, to ask why, to seek meaning. The Portuguese Man O War has no such burden. It simply floats, hunts, grows, reproduces when conditions allow, and drifts onward. There is peace in that simplicity. And perhaps as you fall asleep, you can touch that peace, can let go of the complexities that burden conscious thought, can simply be, like the Portuguese Man O War is, existing in the moment, responding to what comes, requiring nothing more than to continue, to persist, to live. The ocean turns on beneath the moon and stars, tides rise and fall, currents flow in their vast, slow gyres, wind generates waves that march across thousands of miles of open water, before dissipating on some distant shore. And through it all on the surface, in that thin film between water and air. Portuguese Man O War drift, these colonies of living threads, these floating cities of specialized zooids, these paradoxes of individuality and collectiveness, continuing their ancient pattern, unchanged in essence across millions of years of evolution, perfectly adapted to their niche, and in their own way, beautiful. Let yourself drift with them now, metaphorically, as sleep approaches. Let go of control. Let wind and current take you where they will. You're safe here in your bed, far from venomous tentacles. But you can still learn from their example, from their surrender to forces beyond their control, from their success, despite having no agency, from their persistence through perfect adaptation to conditions as they are rather than conditions as one might wish them to be. Sleep well, dream softly. The Portuguese Man O War will still be drifting when you wake, as they have drifted through countless days and nights before, as they will drift through countless more to come. They are patient, in the way that things without consciousness are patient. They have nowhere to be except where wind and current take them. And that perhaps is a lesson worth carrying into sleep, that sometimes the answer is not to struggle against circumstances, but to float with them, to survive by adapting rather than resisting, to find success not through control but through acceptance of what is. Good night. Thank you for drifting with me tonight through these stories of the Portuguese Man O War, this floating colony of living threads, this beautiful and dangerous paradox of the tropical seas. I'll see you again for our next journey into the ocean's depths and mysteries. Until then, rest well, and let the rhythm of distant waves carry you gently into sleep.